I'm Mike Costello, and I'm with Dr. Iris Freelander, and today we'd like to talk to you about judgment. All of us spend a significant amount of our time judging, whether we think about it or not. And the reality is that the judgment that we have of ourselves, of others, of circumstance, of situation, of differences, of appearances, create for all of us difficulties in all of our personal and human relationships. Judgment and our ability to judge others and judge circumstance and judge situations colors the way that we look at all of our human relationships. And one of the great difficulties of human relationships, and one of the things that pulls us apart as persons, is this constant aspect of judging, something that we all do, don't we, Iris?
Yes, indeed, we do. And those of us who think we don't are mistaken. We do.
Right. Judgment, I guess, comes, well, we don't guess, we know it comes from the dynamic of mind and the way that our mind is conditioned to operate. And of course, as children, we begin teaching our young people how they ought to think or how people ought to behave. And so we begin the judgmental process early in life.
It's like children are carefully taught how to be judgmental, and it confuses them sometimes because we tell them to not be, and then we are. And we tell them don't say harsh things against other people, and then we do. But that's part of life and growing up, I guess, isn't it?
It is. But we know too that this aspect of judgment keeps us from the kinds of relationships that we should have, and also keeps us from demonstrating the spirit and the feelings of true love and acceptance.
Yes. I've noticed that in certain parts of the country, in our country, the people are more judgmental in certain areas than others. Have you observed that?
Yeah, I think that has to do certainly with the fact that different areas have certain prejudices, if you
Mm-hmm.
will. And of course, prejudice is part of the dynamic of the negative aspect of judgmentalism.
Mhm. Yes, and thinking that we know better than anyone else, thinking that we know what's right and what's wrong and what's best. And when very often there is no right or wrong, it's just everyone's opinion.
And that's very important when we look at this issue of judgment for ourselves and for all people. And that's important for us to remind everyone. We're not talking about the fact that there are a few judgmental people in the world. It's us, you and I,
Yeah.
and all of those who are watching. It's a real problem that we have as people. But we do have one of the first aspects of looking at judgment. We can really look at this issue of what's right and wrong, and we begin to judge by what we think is right and what we believe everybody else is doing that is wrong. And I think last week when we were talking about this at the church, I was pointing out the fact that we're not talking about the kind of right and wrong things that are self-evident, like murder or harming people. We're talking about the simple ideas that we have about what's right and wrong in terms of the time that we eat or the way that we eat or the way that we handle our household tasks, certain things that we decide are right simply because we've always done them or because we were taught to do them in a certain way.
Yes, and then we think everyone else is wrong if they don't do them just like us, and then we change our mind and do it differently. I know we've changed in our ideas of what's proper nutrition, probably more than anything else in this country, because more and more people are getting into holistic living, organically grown food, and it's interesting, isn't it, how we've changed our ideas in those ways, where some years ago, those who are very much into that now would have been quite judgmental of others at, in years gone.
That's true. And there are still a lot of people who are very judgmental about holistic health, and they
Yeah.
believe that it's all something that people shouldn't get involved in. So,
Yes,
yeah.
but we know from experience that it's not, it's all in our mind. Like you say so well, it's all in our mind. And so if we think it's going to help us, it will help us. And if we think it's not, it's not. And so much of it is just that. So we don't take into account when we're being judgmental all the various facets we don't take into account the other person's frame of reference, where they're coming from. So we have to, if we do, then we will be less judgmental, wouldn't we?
We would definitely be less judgmental. And back on this issue of what's right and wrong, as you said earlier, right and wrong changes from time to time. And again, we're talking about the right and wrong of the aspects of daily living or ideas or thoughts of life. We're not talking about moral issues as much as we're talking about the practical issues of daily living. And so being flexible, and one of the things that an analogy that's used so often, and you've experienced it and I have in talking to couples or people in relationships who are having difficulties, is the differences in the ways that people do things in their normal daily routine becomes a judgment of right and wrong. And the classic one is the toothpaste. And it seems silly, and it is silly, but we know that it gets on people's nerves, such little things as how people handle the toothpaste, or
Hmm.
what they do with their personal possessions, or how it is they handle the television. I guess in today's relationship, one of the big problems is who has the clicker, who has the remote control, and the judgment about what should be done and what shouldn't be done.
Yes.
I remember a story that I've told at the church so many times about a lady who cooked a ham every year for her holiday dinner, and she always cut the end of the ham off. And her husband said, "Why do you do that? It just ruins it." "Because I like the look of the ham and the bone gives it such flavor." And she said, "Well, in our family, we always cut the bone off, and then we put the bone beside the ham and we bake the ham." And he said, "Well, why do you do that?" And she said, "Well, because we've always done it. My mother did it and my grandmother did it." And so on one occasion, when his mother-in-law came to dinner, he asked his mother-in-law, and his mother-in-law said, "Oh, yes, that's the way we do it. We've always done it. That's the way my mother taught me to do it." And so the grandmother happened to be present, and the young man said to the grandmother, "Well, why is it that you do that?" And she looked at him kind of with a puzzled expression and said, "Oh, well, I cut the end off the ham because in those days we didn't have a lot of utensils and we didn't have room to put the whole ham in the pot, so we cut the end of it off." So here was a difference that was carried on through generations. And here, this young woman believed that this is the right way to cook the ham, and any other way is not the right way. Well, that's a kind of a silly example, but so many times in our lives, we do decide what's right and wrong based upon those kinds of influences. Our families teach us or tell us that certain things are right and wrong. Different people tell us what's right and wrong as we're growing up in terms of daily living issues and routines. And then we find that those aren't major issues at all. And really, when we look at the toothpaste, it's not a major issue in life, is it?
No, it isn't, only if we make it that way. And if we can be just thoughtful of other people and just laugh about it. If someone leaves, whatever other people do, if it doesn't hurt anything, if it doesn't harm anyone, then leave them be. And sometimes it's just like they're just thoughtless and daydreaming. And we can always be more tolerant. And I think tolerance would be the word that balances out judgmentalism, isn't it?
It is, definitely. And then we have the kinds of judgment that we make based on our differences.
Mhm.
And of course, those are among the most devastating that we experience in our lives, because that's where that issue of prejudice comes. And we
Mhm.
have racial prejudice, and we have political prejudice, and we have religious prejudice, as we know. And so anyone who is out of our circle, so to speak, so often is judged to be different. And by that judgment of difference, we set ourselves apart from people, and then we create an adversarial circumstance or situation.
Yes, and sometimes, like, if you can't lick them, join them. I was reading a story this week about a man who was Jewish, and he was persecuted by the neighbors, and they were Irish, happened to be Irish. It was on the East Coast, and they beat him up and they were bullies. The Irish boys were bullies toward him, and broke his glasses and did horrible things, unpleasant things to him. So he grew up and became a quite brilliant accountant. So then the Irish boys grew up to be part like the Irish mafia, and then he worked for them. And some of his family visited him, who had known him when he was a child but hadn't seen him much in the interim, and they said to him, "Why on earth do you work for those people?" And he said, "Because that's where the money is." And so we can change in our, that man changed a great deal in
He,
his ideas.
he changed dramatically. And of
Yes.
course, our view of other people really is a very fundamental part of New Thought philosophy. And
Hmm.
we teach in our center, and metaphysical philosophy teaches, and Christian metaphysics teaches, and Christianity in its traditional sense teaches, certainly, the reality that we're all children of God. And if we're all children of God, then that acceptance one of another, despite our differences, is just fundamental to our spiritual well-being, and also our emotional and physical well-being, to our life in general. And those important issues of realizing that everyone is a child of God, regardless of what their political background or their ethnic background or their spiritual background is.
Yes, or anything, any difference of opinion. And sometimes we can change our ideas of being judgmental, our own modality, by just realizing there's a richness in diversity. and to appreciate the other person and appreciate that, yes, they're different. And again, I think humor is always good. And a lot of people have said that I laugh at things that make other people cry. But I think sometimes we do laugh when we could otherwise cry because we can see the humor involved and know, and then not be judgmental.
Mhm. And embrace this concept of diversity.
Yes,
That diversity is really a good thing.
yes.
Where many of us have come from backgrounds and have been taught that diversity is not good, that we need to be within our own circle and that we need to maintain our own integrity. And certainly that is important for us to maintain whatever it is our background is,
Hmm.
but also to do that with a respect and tolerance for people of other beliefs and other backgrounds and other thoughts.
Hmm.
And that respect for diversity, there's a magnificent organization that we all know, Unity and Diversity, which
Yes.
celebrates the fact that even though we can be of whatever faith or whatever race or whatever nationality, we can be proud of that fact. But within the pride that we have within our own group, that we can be inclusively tolerant and understanding of the diversity of those outside of that group. And for those in religious faiths and traditions, it's tremendously important that we do this because religion and spiritual issues have divided us as people for centuries and centuries. And we're now coming to a point in time where we're having a lot of mutual respect for the differences that we have. And one of the great things that's happening in this country is that we used to, or people used to very pridefully say that this is a Christian country, and that kind of left our Jewish brothers and sisters out. And then the word was more Judeo Christian. But in fact, our nation is much larger even than its Judeo Christian issues and presence, because today we have Hindus and Muslims, and we have Buddhists, and we have people of no faith. And so all of those people are coming in a very homogeneous way, and those differences are beginning to melt away. But in order to allow the differences to melt and the judgment to melt, we have to have tolerance and mutual respect for each other.
Yes, and when we do, then we achieve happiness in our own right. And when we're not doing that, then we're really not happy. We're unsettled and we're filled with negative emotions. And so it affects our health.
Right.
It affects our personal relationships.
One of the things that we talk about in New Thought so much is appearances, and we judge by appearances,
Yes,
don't we?
yes, we do. But it's not necessarily a good idea.
Mhm. And appearances, of course, are not necessarily what they appear to be. And one of the things that we understand in New Thought is that even though we have difficulties or challenges in life and things appear to be painful, that beyond that, we realize that there's divine order. And so it is not always the appearances that are true in life. And that's an important aspect to remember, that appearances are deceiving. And one of the things that Christ Jesus taught us was to look beyond the appearances and see the truth. And what we're talking about today is looking beyond the appearances of judgment to the truth of the fact that we're all one, that we're all children of God, and that we can celebrate the diversity and the differences that we have. We'd like to pause at this point in the program and give you an opportunity to receive some literature so that you could continue to study the ideas and thoughts that we're sharing with you today.
We would like to give you the opportunity to explore and discover in your own home the new thought teachings that this program is sharing with you by sending you a free copy of one of these booklets. Simply address your request to Confident Living at P.O. Box 7726, Long Beach, California 90807. Whatever your dream, whatever your vision, you can reach it through confident living.
Before the break, we were talking about judging by appearance. And of course, judging by appearance can be very devastating to us and to other people. And of course, one of the ways that I think we judge by appearance in today, from an economic standpoint, is seeing the homeless or the street people in a negative way, don't we?
Yes, we do. And too often we're judgmental of them, and sometimes they really can't do any better. And other times they don't want to, but that's their prerogative.
Mhm.
That's their
And at
free
this
will.
point in time, the situation, or our role with them, is to be supportive, at least in spirit,
Yes,
of them and to see them in the
yes.
same light that we see ourselves.
And if we do, we send out a certain energy that really makes a difference in their life.
Let's talk about that. How do we,
Okay.
how does our thought and our feeling send energy?
Well, everything is vibration, and as we send our thoughts out, it's a certain vibration, a specific vibration, and then it reaches its mark. I often use the example of when you say thank you to someone and you really mean it and you put energy into it instead of just thank you, just to put energy into thank you. And then when the person responds, it sends a certain energy back to you and you feel it.
Mhm.
And those who are clairvoyant can see that energy being transmitted back and forth. And it's like that in everything. And when we're being judgmental, we're sending gray, dark energy. And when we're being encouraging and hopeful, we're sending light, bright energy. It's just like prayer goes out as light, and you can see that prayer going out as light. Isn't it lovely that we really know that this does work?
Absolutely. And we know too that we harm ourselves with these thoughts of judgment
Yes.
and these decisions that we make to judge others and to judge ourselves. And of course, we do judge ourselves, sometimes very negatively, because many of us have been damaged through our lives by early childhood
Hmm.
circumstances, through our parents or our relatives, or as we came up into our teens and young age, or into relationships or working situations where people were constantly putting us down.
Hmm.
And so it becomes an issue of self esteem and the issue of judgment. And those who are the most judgmental are those who are the most in need of positive and supportive self esteem, isn't it?
Yes, and I've observed another thing very clearly that they are not willing to make changes or to use any kind of conflict resolution. They're just saying, this is it, that's that, and they don't really want to negotiate. But those people who are judgmental are like that. But the people who are non judgmental really want to negotiate, they really want to come to terms. And I've discovered another thing, and I gave myself a lecture in my own personal life and in my neighborhood that if I try to do something to change the circumstance in a wholesome, outgoing way, then I'm not being judgmental. But if I just talk to other people and say, so and so is doing something terrible, then I'm being judgmental.
Yeah.
Isn't that interesting that when we try to rectify the situation, we're not being judgmental?
Mhm. And that judgment really comes from a negative emotion
Yes.
as opposed to a supportive emotion.
Yes. Instead of thinking of the issue, we're thinking of the person when we're being judgmental. But I think if we are really thinking of the issue and really putting our mind to it, then we're trying to make something better out of something that's not desirable.
One of the things we know is that when we're judgmental, as we all are from time to time, but especially those who have a very judgmental nature, those people or those of us who are in the midst of judgment or judging others or judging circumstance or judging difference or judging appearance or judging right and wrong, whatever we're judging, we are short circuiting our ability to express and feel love. And we are suppressing the ability that we have to allow love to come up through us and love to fill us and love to outflow from us to other people. And that's sensed through this energy that we talk about and that you mentioned just a few moments ago. So it's tremendously important to give up judgment
Mhm.
in order to open the channels to love.
Hmm. That's very interesting, isn't it? And those people who are looking for love in all the wrong places are looking in that way, aren't they?
And the judgmental individual is one who often feels unloved
Yes.
and unlovable.
Yes, and harsh, and they're detrimental in other people's lives. It's it's something that if we could tell our audience how to avoid being judgmental, what would be some of the pointers you would give?
Well, I think the beginning point is for all of us to do a self examination, and we
Hmm.
always need to do self examination and look at how it is our mind operates. And we need to look critically at ourselves, or objectively, I shouldn't say critically, but look objectively at ourselves and identify whether or not we really have been judgmental and
Hmm.
whether we are on a day to day basis. Exemplifying and demonstrating judgmental qualities. And if we are, then identify that and acknowledge that that is a flaw in our character, it's a
Hmm.
flaw in our being, and it's a flaw in our spiritual well being. And that's a beginning point, I think,
Hmm.
to identify that one is a judgmental
And
individual.
then to acknowledge to self that yes, I'm being judgmental. And then to reach out to others in a constructive way would then be non-judgmental, wouldn't it?
It would. And one of the techniques that we shared at church last Sunday was the count to 10, which is a
Uh-huh.
very good one. And I think once we identify the fact that we are judgmental, then we can alert ourselves. We can begin to put a little reminder in our brain, in our
Mhm.
conscious mind, so that when we see judgment coming in, when we see ourselves judging people or circumstances or differences, that we then stop and count to 10 and not count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, but count 10 of our own faults,
Uh-huh.
because every one of us have faults. And
Exactly.
if anyone claims they don't, then there's a problem, because we all have faults, some minor, some major, but we all have faults. And if we stop and reflect upon our own faults and count 10 of our faults, we then tend to move our consciousness away from the person that we're judging into the judgment of self. And when we move to the judgment of self, then we're able to change that behavior and change that thought process, because we're able to understand more fully what's going on within ourselves.
Mhm. And if we're really assess ourselves honestly, we can always see, can't we, where there needs to be change and where we need to be thoughtful of others.
And we all need change,
Yes,
every one of us, and we need to constantly be changing,
yes.
because change is growth. And we need to change our way of thinking about others. We need to gain a greater acceptance for life and acceptance for circumstance and situation, and we need to embrace that. And then above all, we need to allow ourselves to be well springs of love.
Yes.
And without being well springs of love, we cannot at all overcome this aspect of judgment. And that judgment issue keeps us from being loving, being loved, because we don't believe that we're lovable. But most importantly, that outflow and inflow of love. And of course, the tremendous teaching that we have about abundance and about supply and demand, and about love, is that all of these things need to flow out from us and flow into us and flow out from us. And so it is a constant, as Dr. Garlish, the founder of our church, used to say, an unceasing ebbing and progression. And that wonderful idea, something ebbs along and that
Yes.
we're ebbing, and that love is constantly ebbing in and out, just like the tide. And it just needs to be a part of everything that we do.
Mhm. The same thing is true in giving, just to being generous in with whatever it is we're giving. And we give that we may get, that we may give again. I remember hearing that years ago from a lady named Iris Ratsey in England, and I thought that sounded rather convoluted, but actually it's true, isn't it?
It's absolutely true.
Yes.
It's out, in, out,
Yes.
in, out, in. And everything about life is rhythm. Breathing is rhythm. Heart is rhythm. Our neurological system is rhythm. Our spiritual reality is energy. And so this rhythm of life is just tremendously important. And getting out of the rhythm of judgment and into the rhythm of love.
And from what you just said, it's very obvious that when we're judgmental, we're really harming ourselves more than we're harming the other person, because those negative energies within us can be like acid eating away at us. Isn't it true?
That's absolutely true. And it's not only eating away at our mind, it's eating away at our spiritual being, and it's eating away at our physical being.
Mhm.
Because we all know that judgmental people are bitter.
Yes.
And bitter is a wonderful word. I mean, you just speak the word and you feel it. And so judgment brings us bitterness of mind, bitterness of body, and bitterness of spirit. And that bitterness is going to cause nothing except disintegration. And we know that judgment, and many people in holistic centers and spiritual centers have even given disease modalities to judgment. And I don't know that we want to do that, because whether that's true or not, but there are certainly negative diseases that come about because of our thought process and because of what's going on in our mind. And judgment is certainly not going to create anything good in our body
That's
or in
right.
our mind or in our spirit.
But I've heard that cancer is caused by repression, and I believe that might be true, because I've looked at lots of people I know who've had cancer, and they repress their feelings or emotions. They didn't feel like speaking out because they thought it wouldn't be good. So I think we need to address that we need to express our feelings, but in a non-judgmental way. And if we do it impersonally, then that would help, wouldn't it?
Definitely would help. And of course, expressing ourselves can be done in a very fair and honest way. And it is important to express our feelings. And in no way do we ever talk about people failing to feel what they feel
Yes.
and to deal with what it is they're feeling, and then to move on from that point. And so and of course in New Thought, we talk so often about affirmations and denials, and so many people misinterpret that teaching. And there are certainly New Thought teachers and practitioners and ministers in churches and centers that do talk about really repressing negative influences and aspects, but we don't teach that at all. And we think it's important to understand and accept where we are. That's why we say if we want to do introspection, if we want to do self-examination, we'll identify the fact. If we're a judgmental person, we're a judgmental person. And so it doesn't do any good to deny that we're a judgmental person, but we can overcome that.
Exactly.
And we can change that behavior. And so the importance is in changing the behavior, not in denying the behavior or not in denying the thought process, but change. And change is the key.
I think transmute could be used in that sense, couldn't it?
Transmute and that transformation of life is what we're teaching and what we're trying to get people to do in all aspects of their life.
Yes, and when we're thinking of ourselves and trying to be self-evaluate, if we express anger, if we were angry, then we need to look into it because that wouldn't be a good that wouldn't be good for us. So that would be a key, wouldn't it?
Yes, definitely. And it's a key to look within honestly and objectively, but not critically.
Yeah.
Not to criticize self and not to judge self, but simply to identify, simply to make an identification and to say, accept it, not as right or wrong, as we said, no, never as right or wrong, but to just accept it as the way it is.
Well, usually the way we judge ourselves is the way we judge others. If we say, oh, I was just so stupid, then usually that's how we express our feelings toward other people, about other people.
And of course, when we say something like that, we're certainly building upon the negative aspects of life because we're talking about how negative we are and how negative other people are. And so in this segment, Dr. Freelander and I have been sharing with you ideas on how to overcome judgment. And as we talked during this time, we've shared with you the fact that the judge is indeed always in. The judge is in your mind and in your heart and in your life. And you are judging yourself every day. And so we invite you to judge yourself as good, to judge those around you as good, and to embrace and support life in all of its aspects and in all of its experiences. We hope you found this information useful, and we look forward to seeing you next time.
This program is a community outreach of Christ Church. Dr. Mike Costello speaks each Sunday morning at 11 a.m., and Dr. Iris Freelander speaks on Wednesday evenings at 7 p.m. at the church. On Sunday evenings at 6 p.m., there is a meditation and healing service. Come and join us. You will be warmly welcomed.